Hi guys! So I am starting soft pastel demo and I am just going to tweak the lighting so it's not too blown out color wise, help things focus. So welcome to the live stream. This is my first live stream and I'm really excited to be doing it. But if there's any issues that happen with it, please bear with me. I'm still learning this process as I go along. So today we are going to be painting a holiday wreath, and we are going to be using soft pastels for this. We're going to keep it really painterly, really simple. We're not going to be trying to get too much fine detail or even doing a ton of manual blending or technical techniques. We're just going to be using our pastels and demoing how to layer them up in real time to achieve dimension and shape in your picture. So this is kind of what our final result will look like. I'm going to tweak and adjust it. This was my practice run, and I have some changes that I want to make for the class today. So for those that are new watching this, I am Lauren Watkins. I am a watercolor and soft pastel artist. I work a lot on YouTube teaching. I have done commissioned work and I still do sometimes. I teach live classes in my home state of Utah, and I am really excited about the prospect of doing live stream lessons so that you guys can see the art process in real time and you guys can see and hear why I'm choosing colors and why I'm doing things the way that I am, and even see my mistakes, because sometimes that gets edited out of videos and it can be really encouraging in some ways to see other artists make mistakes and then see how they fix them, because we're all going to make mistakes in our pictures and we want to be able to fix them. So let's go over the supplies that we're going to be using today. First off, we are going to be using the Mungyo Soft Pastels. This kit is a student and even a child kit. It's rated for ages 3 and up. The reason why I choose this kit is you get a lot of saturated colors. It's non-toxic and it's very inexpensive. So if you are just starting with pastels and trying to figure out whether you like it or not, or your children are looking for pastels to use, this is a really good kit to get you started on that path. It can be really, really intimidating when you are getting into art and you're seeing all these hefty price tags and you feel like almost you can't create art because you can't get the fancy supplies that you see other people using. Nothing wrong with the fancy supplies. I have a lot in my own studio, but I want to keep art accessible. So we're going to be using this kit. This is the 64 set of Mungyo pastels. And then I also have this big white pastel. This is a Jack Richenson soft pastel. The reason why I chose this is because it is a more opaque pastel and it's softer. So in pastels, the softer your pastel, the easier it is to layer on top of other layers. If you use a really hard pastel, it might scrape off the layers that you've already put down. So that's our paper. I have a scrap paper right here that will allow me to kind of clean off my dirty pastels and swatch the colors for you so that you can see what colors I'm choosing. The other thing I'm going to be using is pastel paper. This is the Strathmore pastel paper. I'm sorry the camera's flipped. I couldn't get the OBS program to work today, so hopefully on my next live stream I'll be able to do that and be able to switch the camera back. So I'm sorry if all the words are reversed, but this is Strathmore pastel paper and it is a textured paper. You can't really see it on the screen, but it's a little bit more roughly textured than like typical drawing paper. And what it does is it allows you to put a lot more layers on your paper, and it really grabs the pigment of the pastels as you drag the pastels across your paper. I am going to be using this green gray color. I'm going to just pull a sheet out for today. And the nice thing about this green gray color is since our wreath is green, it is going to allow us to utilize this undertone, and we won't be fighting the white of the paper and it's going to allow our brights or our highlights to really show up since it's not pure white. And if there's any bits or pieces where I didn't get pastel, it's not going to be shining bright white. Okay, so that's my paper. The other thing I'm going to be using, and this is optional, is I'm going to be using a board and some tape to tape down my paper to. I'm not going to be using a lot of paper. It's not like stretching watercolor paper. But what it does is it allows you to hold, like pick up your paper and move it around without having to get pastel on your hands. So I have a question. Would you say that it's more rough than Canson watercolor paper? I would say it's a similar texture to the Canson XL watercolor paper. It's a finer texture, but it's not like necessarily more bumpy, like up and down texture. But I have my board and I have my paper on it, and then I'm just going to take a little bit of masking tape and I'm going to just put a couple pieces down just to hold it. Again, I don't have to stretch it like watercolor paper. This is just like going to keep it from moving. And then something else to keep in mind, when I get dust buildup on my paper, I'm going to pick up my board and shake it off into either a garbage can. For me, it's easier to use a cookie sheet that I have off to the side, and I'll shake off all the dust that I am generating into that. That way I don't get dust all over my desk space and it gets really messy. And I don't get in the habit of blowing your dust. You don't want to blow your pastel dust away because your pastel dust can get into your face. It can get into like any electronics or anything you have nearby. And if you are starting to work with more professional quality art supplies, there might be ingredients that are like heavy metals or things like that that can be pretty messy and potentially harmful to your health if you inhale it. So you want to make sure you are handling the dust by getting rid of it and not like blowing it around. Okay, so here is my paper. I've got most of my supplies, and then I'm just going to use a pencil to sketch. If you have a pastel pencil, that is also a great option, or you can just sketch with your pastels. The nice thing about pastels is they're a little bit more opaque than watercolor. So if you make a mistake, you can always cover it with other pastels. But to get started, I'm going to draw the inner circle of our wreath. And the nice thing with this is it doesn't have to be perfect. So let's see if it's, actually I might have to switch to a pastel pencil just so you guys can see what I'm drawing. So I'm gonna, there we go. So I've got a pastel pencil just so you guys can see. A regular pencil will work just fine. So there's the inner circle of our wreath. I can always make it smaller and I can tweak and adjust, but this is my starting point. And then I'm going to draw the outer circle. And again, we're going to tweak and adjust this as we go along. So I'm going to, let's see, make this circle a little bit smaller. And I'm going to bring this up a little bit more. And I'm all right with my wreath coming off the edges. I want it to fill up the whole edge of the paper, make it feel like a nice giant wreath. If you have it end like right on the edge of the paper and not have it go off, it can create visual tension. So you either need to make it fit within the size all the way, or you need to have your edges or have the edges of it go all the way off the paper. Okay, so I have my basic shape. And again, this is really rough. We're going to tweak and adjust as we go along. I'm going to grab a red pastel just to help differentiate the lines for you. And I'm going to start working on the bow. Now, in my example, I had kind of the ribbons going down. I've decided not to do that in this picture, just for the size that we're working on. I feel like it works better to have the whole bow just be contained right here and not have the tails of it coming down. So I'm gonna, in the middle, I'm going to draw a curved line, and this is going to be the start of the knot that's in the middle. Okay, and then I'm going to drag a line across the bottom, a curved line going up the top on the other side, and then rounded line connecting it. So it's almost like this curved rectangular shape. It's got four corners, but the long edges kind of curve parallel with each other, and then it's rounded up on the top and rounded on the bottom. Okay, and we'll tweak and adjust this. Then I'm going to draw a teardrop shape coming off one end and a teardrop shape coming off the other side. This is going to be where the ribbon kind of folds over on itself, and you can see the other side of it. Then I'm going to come down just a little bit, and this is the sides of the ribbon, and then I'm going to pull the bottom and bring it in towards the knot. And again, we can tweak and adjust these as we go along. Now I'm going to do the bottom bow because this is a double bowed ribbon, and I'm going to do my teardrop, but I'm going to have part of it start behind this upper bow. So it's a similar teardrop shape, but I want this upper bow to kind of go in front of it. And then I'm going to do another one over here. I'm not going to make it super symmetrical. The same type of thing. I just want a teardrop shape. Then I'll do the lines coming off and then connect it to the knot. Okay, so we've got our big bow, we've got our wreath blocked out. The next thing I'm going to do is just draw some circles. These might be a little too big. And I think that looks all right. I'm going to do some smaller ones. And then we can tweak the size of these as we work. I'm going to have a few go off the edges. But now we have kind of a base shape and outline to work from on our wreath. So I'll pause for a minute and let you guys, if you're following along, catch up. And this is a great time to ask me any questions as I'm letting you guys catch up on this. So if you have any more questions to ask, feel free to ask them. So I hope you guys are excited for the holidays. We just got our Christmas tree, and we are like, my kids are so excited to have it up in the house, and our house smells like pine. It's one of my favorite things about this time of year is just having that clean smell of like a fresh pine tree. Okay, so we have our sketch, and now I'm going to get started blocking in the wreath. I'm not going to worry about the ornaments right now. I'm going to be working on kind of this green section. I'm going to be using a variety of greens. I'm going to pull some of them down here onto the side. I'm going to choose some lighter greens. Some of them are going to be a little bit more yellow. Some of them are going to be a little bit more neutral and kind of more realistic. Let's see, I want some darker colors to help be the shadows. I like this dark green color. So I'm kind of just pulling some of these out. I'm also going to be using some of the dark blues to help build up some of the shadow tones. This one's broken, so I'm going to just have a little chunk of it. So these are going to be the colors I'm going to be using on the wreath to get started. I might pull other colors in. I might tweak and adjust it as we go along. I might not even use all of these colors, but for me, I like kind of pulling colors that I think I'll be using just so I can have them ready to go. Now with my wreath, I want the light to be coming from this side. So this side of the wreath is going to have some lighter tones, some lighter values, and then have it be darker on the inside of the circle and more of a shadow on the opposite side. There will still be highlights over here because our wreath is dimensional, but I'm keeping this in mind so I know where to kind of place my color. So I'm going to start with a lighter green color. Let me show you. So kind of it's like a light sappy grass green color. It reminds me of spring. And I'm going to just hold my pastel on the side and start doing little side strokes to start filling it in. Okay. And I'm going to focus most of it on the side that I want the highlight to be, but I am going to spread it out because you don't want a color just to appear in one spot on your picture. You want it to kind of bounce around and show up in other areas so that you have a little bit more color harmony. So that was our light green. I'm going to take my next green, this one. It's a little bit darker, but it's still a lighter green color. And I'm going to start layering it up. Let's see. There we go. One thing that I have had issues with this Mungyo set is that these are machine pressed. And so sometimes they are really, really hard, and they almost get like a coating on the outside that makes it hard for color to deposit. So you can see this green section right here. That's from some kind of coating that they put on it, and it won't deposit color. It almost like is too glossy. So if that doesn't work, I switched sides and it worked fine. But if you're having issues with it, you can take a little bit of sandpaper and just rub it off, and that will solve that issue. But I just switched sides, and now I'm going to go back and doing these little side strokes to start building up the layers with our pastels. If you use a paper like a sanded paper, sometimes pastel hardness isn't as much of an issue, and you can do a lot of layers on that paper. So it's a little bit more forgiving. The reason why I'm using this kind of side stroke is it's filling in a large area quickly, but it's also starting to build up some of the texture of our wreath. So I've used that green. I'm going to start building in some of our darker greens. I'm going to take this kind of, it almost reminds me of a phthalo green. It's kind of like a bright grass green color. And I'm going to start blocking that in. And with this layering technique, the colors are going to start mixing together on the paper. So like with watercolor or oil paints or acrylics, you mix it on your palette. With pastels, you mix your colors on the paper. You mix them by either layering or by manually blending. Okay, so I did some more darker colors on this inner side of this side of the ring because the sun is shining here and our wreath is curving. And so this side is going to be in shadow. On the opposite side, this side of the wreath is going to have the sun hitting it or the light hitting it. And then on the opposite side, as it curves around, this side's going to be more in shadow. And just something to remember, to keep a light hand as you're doing it. You don't want to push as hard as you can because you don't want to fill in the tooth of your paper. The tooth of your paper is the texture of your paper. So you're starting to see some of that texture showing through over here. If I fill this all in right now, my paper won't be able to accept any more layers of pastel. And that will limit how much I can do detail-wise. It just really affects what I can create. So the lighter the hand you keep, the more layers you can build up on your picture. So we're starting to get a little bit more color variation and value variation. I'm going to take this dark blue-green color and again, just start building up those layers more and more. And I'm just kind of rotating my strokes. I'm still holding my pastel the same way, but I'm turning my pastel to create different kinds of markings. And I can even have some of them come off the edges like this a little bit because the wreath has branches coming out and I want to have some of that variation in my picture. Okay, I'm going to pull some of it in just a little bit more on this side. Okay. I'm going to take this moss kind of gray-green color and I'm going to start using that to build some more dimension up in this highlighted section. We're going to pull some of these other colors in here, but we're just slowly building up these layers. And we want to use a variety of greens and let them mix together so that we can get more natural greens. Sometimes with your pastels, you can get really, really vibrant colors, but a lot of the greens, I don't know what it is about that color, can look really, really unnatural. So by layering them up, mixing them with some other colors, you can start to get more natural looking greens. That's one of the things I like most about this set is that all of the greens aren't like this like neon and like fluorescent colors, but you have some of these earthy tone greens, which you don't always get in sets, even with some professional sets I've had. They've had poor selections to choose from. So we're just building this up. And as you're building it up, you can tweak your shape. So I kind of pulled this a little bit too far this way. So I'm going to kind of tweak it and adjust it as necessary. So now we're starting to get that base layer going. I'm going to take kind of this dark green. Let's push up my palette just a little bit. This dark kind of blue-green color. And I'm going to start blocking in a few of the darker shadows. As I go along. Okay. I'm going to do some of that along the bottom. And I'm also going to use some of it right around where some of these ornaments are going to go, because there's going to be a little bit of a shadow in those areas. For this one, instead of holding my pastel directly like flat on the side, I'm kind of tilting it just a little bit so it's leaning more on this edge. I'm not doing directly on the corner, but I am focusing up on this side of the pastel. And I'm just trying to keep some of my strokes a little bit more random so it doesn't look too artificial, I guess is the word. Our brains kind of pick up if there starts to be too much of a pattern. And if there's too much of a pattern, our brain will be like, that doesn't look realistic. So I'm making sure everything's nice and random. Okay. So I'm going to do just a few random bits of this color in other areas so that it shows like there's gaps in the wreath. There's like a branch that's underneath another one, creating some depth within the shapes. I just got a ring at the doorbell and I will be right back. Give me a second. Okay, guys, so this is where we're at on the wreath. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start blocking in some of the reds and start filling in kind of these ornaments. Now with the ornaments, I'm going to still have the lighter colors be coming from this side of the wreath where the light is coming. So to make these ornaments look a little bit more rounded, I'm going to have it be a little bit lighter of a red tone on these sections and then have it get darker on the backside. So a similar concept to what we've been doing with the wreath. And I'm going to have to pause and mute it again in just a few minutes. My neighbor needed help with something, but as I'm waiting for her, we'll get started on this. So I'm going to pick out my red tones. I'm going to do some more warmer reds and then do some more pinky tones. The warmer reds are really great where they lean almost more orange because it feels like there's a light hitting it. There's warmth to it. Whereas if it's a little bit more blue toned red or cooler, leaning more towards pink and purple, it feels a little bit more like it's in shadow. So we're going to use that to help create dimension within our ornaments and our bow. So we've got some reds, magentas. I'm going to do a pale yellow to help start blocking in some highlights. So let's see what these colors look like. So we've got our yellow, we've got our kind of pure red, our orangey red, some pinks and purples as these get a little bit darker. And then we'll also have a little bit more of the greens showing up in the ornaments, and that will help dimension and the reflectiveness of the ornaments show up. By having some green reflected in the ornaments, it will really help it feel shiny, if that makes sense. So I'm going to start off by taking our light yellow, and some of these smaller ornaments, I'm going to do more of a gold technique with them. So I'm just going to focus on the big ornaments to be our red ones. But I'm going to take kind of this lighter color and I'm just going to block in where I want the biggest highlights to be. Okay. And I'm looking at each ornament, kind of figuring out how the light would hit that and reflect the light on it. Okay. I'm undecided whether I'm going to make this one red or not. We'll make it red. Red ornaments are my favorite. Okay, so we kind of blocked in where the highlight's going to be. We're going to be doing more layers of highlight in that section, but I just wanted to start to mark it. Now I'm going to take our orangey red tone. This one's kind of like I don't know, like fire. It's not quite fire truck red. It's a little bit more orange than that. But we're going to start blocking that in close to where the highlights are. And I'm going to make my strokes on this follow the curve of the ornament, okay? And then I'm going to take our, let's see, kind of our true red color, and I'm going to overlap that and kind of layer it next to this fire truck red. And some of the light of this is being blown out. Let's see if I can make it so it's not so overly bright. When I was testing the lighting on here earlier, there wasn't as much light showing through my windows in my studio. So it's kind of adjusted some of those lighting issues. Okay, so now I'm doing some more red tones. And then I'm going to take our darker, let's see, this one's kind of like a magenta-y red. And start popping that in. Okay, and again, we're just doing the early layers of this. We'll tweak and adjust it as we go along. And one thing I've learned about art is whatever picture you're doing, it will always go through an ugly stage where you begin to panic and you wonder if you've ruined your picture. So we're just gonna keep working, and then we'll work past those ugly stages to get to where we are liking it. So now we can see where we've kind of blocked in that highlight. It's looking very, very dramatic. So I'm going to take our orange pastel and I'm going to kind of just gently draw over that section. I'm going to keep a very light hand. I don't want to cover up all of it, but I want this to still read as red. Okay. Now we're going to do a similar technique on our bow. So the side that I'm going to have this side of the bow be more of a highlight. So I'm going to use more of the orangey red on this side. The knot is curved and round, and it's going to get a little bit more of a highlight on this top side. And I'm just using side strokes for this because I can get a wide area of coverage that's pretty even. I'm going to do some on this, on the opposite side bow, and I'm going to just make sure my strokes are kind of following the curve of the ribbon, okay? So we've blocked in some of those highlights. And then I'm going to focus on some of our darker values now and kind of get those blocked in before I do the midtones. So I'm going to take this darker red and I'm going to put it right along this edge of this knot. And on the bottom side of the bow, because the light is coming in from the top and the side. So this bottom side is going to have more of a shadow. Coming along on the other side, getting some more of those shadows marked in. And I'm making sure my strokes are following these curves of the ribbon that we've drawn. Okay, because if we did this all like straight horizontal strokes, it's not going to look as dimensional and it's not going to look like it's curving around the paper. And by making your strokes, whether with it's a paintbrush when you're painting or your line marks when you're drawing, if you can make your brush strokes kind of follow the curve of your object, it's one, going to make it look more realistic and dimensional, and two, it's going to ease up a lot of the work you have to do. Okay, so our ribbon, where it's making this knot, we're going to have a little bit of a shadow down here, and there's going to be some folds and tucks in it. So I'm going to draw some of those lines along there. Okay, I'm going to pause for a minute and let you guys catch up, and then we'll get started on the next thing. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Okay. So now we've got kind of more of our shadowed reds and our highlighted reds, I'm going to block in some of our darkest values that are going to be on this bow. So we're going to have where the ribbon folds onto itself. We're going to have that more in shadow, and we're going to have where some of these creases and folds be some of those darkest areas on the ribbon. Now, I don't have any reds that are really darker than what I have here, and I need some of these folds and sections to be darker than that. So that gives us a few options. We can pull in a new color that might be darker in value, like a dark brown or a dark blue, and kind of play with color like that. Another option we can do is by mixing. So we could do black if we wanted, and then do red over the top of it to darken those values and mix it on the paper. There's a couple different ways to approach this. I'm going to lean into the fact that blues tend to read more like their shadows. And so I'm going to use some of the dark blues in this to start building up these shadowed areas. And then I can do light layers of red over the top of it to tone it so that it plays more friendly with the red. So let's see, which blue do I want to use for this? I'm going to use kind of this dark navy blue color that I had. Dark purple would also work good. Maybe I'll show you with purple first. The purple isn't really any darker in value than some of these reds that I'm using, but since it's a different color, it can play into shadow. So I'll start with the purple, and then we'll do some tweaks and adjustments with the red or with the blue. So I'm going to come in and fill in some of this teardrop section and right along where the knot curves, right along the base. And since it's a different color and it's a cooler tone, it can read a little bit more of a shadow. And it has some of those red tones. Since it's purple, it has red in it, so it plays a little bit more nicely with that. But since it's the same value, it doesn't read that much darker. And so that's why I want to pull in a darker color, like this darker blue, which is darker in value, to really help push some of those shadows. And I'm going to do that in these teardrop sections, right along the base of some of these ribbons. And get some of that blocked in. Now this looks crazy. And if you're panicked, I don't blame you. But we're going to do more layers over the top of this, but we're just blocking in some of these shadows, and then we'll blend it in with our red. So I'm going to take kind of a dark pink red, and I'm going to start layering that up over the top of this. And again, we'll be doing lots of layers over this and fine-tuning the details and the lines. But by making it a little bit redder, it's helping it to start to blend in a little bit more. Now I'm starting to get a lot of dust buildup, and I don't want to leave that on my paper. So I'm going to go kind of tap it off into, I have a cookie sheet next to me that I tap it off in. It's an old one that I keep in my studio, but if you don't have one, you can do a garbage can. So we've blocked in some of these shadows. We have our dimension built up in most of our wreath. I'm going to take our fire truck red, kind of our true red color, and I'm going to start doing, let's see, that side stroke doesn't want to work. Maybe I'll switch colors. This one will work better. I'm going to go on the side and just kind of start blending in some of these colors together. Not covering up completely what we've done, especially on those highlighted sections, but it's starting to bring a little bit more of a color harmony into our bow, okay? I'm just filling in some of these gaps. It's all right to layer it up over the top of what we've done. There we go. It's kind of weird looking at this on the computer because it's flipped. So it makes it it's kind of bending my mind because I look at it on the computer and it looks like it's on the left side that needs tweaking, but it's really the right side on my paper. Okay, so we've got our big giant bow kind of blocked in. Now I'm going to finish in the blocking by putting in our gold. And gold is very yellow, but it's also very reflective and kind of is adjusted by the colors around it. And I don't want to use these like bright neon yellows because then it will read as yellow instead of gold. So for the gold colors, I'm going to use this pale yellow that we used earlier on the reds. And I'm going to pick some of these like ochre tone colors. So like kind of an earthy yellow color, more like natural blonde. And then we can do reflective bits of other colors within it. But these are going to be the main colors we're going to use with it. I'm going to start with the mid-tone of it. And I'm going to start filling in these sections. And if your pastel is kind of laying down a color that it is not, it could be that it's dirty. You see how the end of this pastel is dirty? So I just have a apron, but if you have a paper towel or anything like that, you can just wipe it off on that and it just cleans it up so you can get clean lines of color. Okay. Then I'm going to use the darker yellow color that we pulled, or the darker ochre color. Again, put that on the one side where it's going to be a little bit more in shadow. And start blocking that in, and then we can do kind of the highlighted section. And again, we'll be tweaking and adjusting as we go along. So there is everything roughly blocked in, and then we can start building up the layers. So I'll pause for a minute. If you guys are following along, then you guys can catch up. Again, if you have any questions about watercolor or soft pastels, art in general, anything like that, just let me know and I can do my best to answer them for you. So the next thing for me I'm going to do is I'm going to start building up the layers for the background. That way I can make sure I get all the values kind of balanced. I know some artists, they like finish a section completely and then they move out from there. For me, I tend to bounce around on my picture. And so for this, I'm going to start putting in some of those blue values for the background. I want it to almost look like this wreath is on an old door or like I want it to be textured, this blue tone, so that it reads like a old painted wall or barn. I don't know. Um, I've seen growing up in a farming community, I'd see big old wreaths hung on old barns, and the barns kind of had a blue tone from the weathered wood. And so that's kind of what my brain was thinking of, and old colorful doors. So for this, I'm going to pick out some of these blue tones, some like of the teals, the darker and lighter ones, even some gray tones. And then we'll do some shadows and things like that. But a blue and or two light blues. I'm also going to grab this kind of light periwinkle. It doesn't read the same color on the screen, but it's kind of a light periwinkle, like bluish purple color. And I'm going to start off with this light teal color, and I'm just going to do vertical strokes, and I can do some like doing it downward or doing an upward stroke, just depending on what works best for that section. And again, you might have to clean off your pastel in between if you start picking up too many odd colors. Okay, so that's kind of our base color. Now I'm going to take this darker blue color, and I'm going to do similar strokes with it, but I'm also going to focus a higher concentration of it right where there will be more shadows. So at the base of our wreath, right around the top side of the inner circle, and then I'll just do a little bit on the opposite side of where the light is coming in from. Okay, then we have kind of our dark gray, focus that in some of the sections where there's going to be a little bit more shadow. I'll probably pull in some other colors and for shadows a little bit later on, but I don't want it to get too vibrant that it competes with the wreath. And so that's why I'm kind of dulling this down with a dark gray color. And it's all right if you overlap these colors with your wreath. That way you can avoid a little bit of a halo effect that happens. And then I've got this purpley blue. This is almost like a highlighting color. I'm just going to pull that around where I want a few highlights to be. And when we get towards the end, I'll remove this tape and we'll blend it in that way. So one question I got is, for pastels, do you use fixative for everything, or is there a way to store them without them? Mainly wondering what doesn't cause a mess. Okay, so I use a couple different fixatives. There's workable fixative from Krylon, and that's when you can spray on your paper and then you can do more layers over the top. It's really, really helpful if you've kind of used up most of the tooth of your paper and you need to do a little bit more work to finish it. And that is a great option for it. It can darken your artwork, which can be a pro or a con depending on how you're using it. So sometimes if I've done a whole area and I found that it needs to be darkened, I'll spray that workable fixative in that area just to darken it up a bit. But for storage, a fixative I found, it's from Krylon. It might be noise. Let me mute this for a second so you don't hear clanging as I get it out and show you. Sorry about the camera shaking. My basket of fixatives and stuff is um, directly behind the swing arm for the camera. So this is reverse, but it's Krylon Fine Art Fixative, and it's the blue series, and it safeguards pastel, charcoal, pencil, chalk dust, things like that. And it prevents smudging and fading. And I really like that. This is a product that's pretty new to me, but it is a great fixative to use. Um, but for storage, I still like to be extra safe with my pastel work. And so I will take glassine paper, which is a it's a static proof paper. And I will wrap my picture in that and kind of tape it on the back side of it and then store it flat. That is a great way to keep my pastels from smudging or creating much of a mess, or framing it. That's another great option. So hopefully that gives you some ideas. With pastels being so messy, I usually like to use multiple approaches to keep them from making a mess. So I have some pastel dust that has built up, so I'm going to shake that off quick. And then we're going to get started on the next stage of this picture. Okay, so we've done all of the blocking in, and now I want to start refining the lines, the details, to really help this become more dimensional and not quite so cartoony. So one way we're going to do that is by changing up the strokes we're using to create the wreath. So I'm going to grab my green color. This is like a dark grass green. And instead of doing as many like side strokes that we were doing earlier, I'm going to take it on kind of its narrower side, and I'm going to start doing like little squiggly lines. Okay. And it's all right if some of them overlap our ornaments, because then it makes it look like those ornaments are nestled in around the branches of our wreath. And just blocking it in. So now our wreath is looking like way more textural than what it was before. Then I'm going to do that same thing with a different green. I'm going to use kind of this mossy gray-green color and do the same thing. Again, I'm not pushing too hard because I don't want to fill in the tooth of the paper just yet. But you can also do some like side strokes if you want it to blend some of those sections if they're getting too similar. And I'm going to do some over and close to our golden ornaments. Okay. And I'm even going to do kind of this royal ultramarine blue color. And I'm going to start adding that in here in bits, especially around some of the more shadowed sections. Just to play with color. When I'm doing a more like painterly picture like this, where I'm not going for ultra realism, personally, I like to have fun with color and throwing it into different areas of the picture. So blues tend to read like they're in shadow. So I'm going to play on that and put more of these blue tones in those shadowed sections. Let's see if I can speak clearly for. So we've got this dark blue color. Now I'm going to come in with our kind of darkest green color, and I'm going to start doing like twisty lines. So what I'm doing is I'm taking my pastel and I'm kind of twisting it on the paper. And what that's creating are like individual branches and lines coming out of our wreath. And the nice thing about this technique is it creates really unique and lines so everything doesn't start looking too uniform. I did a whole video last week on how to create different kinds of texture using soft pastels. And so if you are new to pastels or you're trying to find a way to kind of mix up what you're doing, that video can be really helpful in teaching you different ways to create texture and how to apply your pastels in unique ways to help you with your picture. Okay. I'm going to turn my paper just a little bit, and I'm going to use that turned paper to kind of help randomize some of these strokes I'm doing so that they don't all go the same direction. Sometimes you want things to all go the same direction, but sometimes you want it a little bit more randomized. So if you're having a hard time kind of getting your arm in the position you need it to be in, or not getting something to look the way you want it to, sometimes by turning your picture can help you get that fixed. I'm going to add a little bit of more of the dark pastels around to this bottom section above the bow. And I'm cleaning up around the bow as well so that I don't have too much of a halo effect going on. Okay. Turn this back. A few more of those lines. I'm going to take our dark navy blue and, whoops, my pastel crumbled. Let me dust that off quick. There we go. And do a few of these kind of random markings in a really dark color. Okay. And again, just making sure there's a little bit of a shadow in and around these ornaments so they look like they're sitting in there. Okay. So I'm going to pause for a second and let you guys catch up, and then we'll get going. If you have any questions about what we've done so far, it's a great time to ask. And I always keep a wet rag next to me when I'm working. So when I take a break, I can wipe my hands off so they don't get too out of control messy. If you don't like pastels because you don't like the feel of the pastels on your hands or how messy they get, sometimes I will work with latex gloves on, or just kind of like the medical gloves that you see. And those are really helpful because, like, if I'm going to go do something quick in between painting, I can just peel my gloves off and set them to the side and my hands are still clean. so then I don't end up with stained blue hands. So I'm going to start working a little bit more on this bow because everything else is starting to look a lot more dimensional, but this bow is still looking very cartoony and flat. And I'm going to start refining it and adding a little bit more detail to it so that it can start looking dimensional and like it belongs on this wreath. So with our ribbons, when they're coming into this knot, the ribbon is usually like starts to compress down and you get full and it doesn't stand out quite as much. This is something that can be really helpful looking at like a reference photo for, so to help you gauge like how the shadows and highlights form. I'm kind of just winging this. So I'm going to go off of memory and experience to help with this. But if you're starting, it always is really helpful to have a reference photo to pull from. So let's see. I'm going to take, let's see, that dark red color. And I'm going to start blocking in a shadow section. And it's going to come kind of at an angle from the top of the ribbon down, okay? And then I'm going to do kind of a C shape on this bottom ribbon. This is just to help it look like it's kind of folded and around. And we'll tweak and adjust this as we go along. Then on the opposite side, I'm going to pull this upper ribbon. I'm going to make it a little bit wider and kind of have it go in front of this bottom one. So I'm going to just kind of fix this as I go along. I think it will help with some of the proportions with it. And then I'm going to build up some of the shadows. And then this bottom one, we're going to do the shadow coming from the knot and kind of following along the base. And there's going to be a bit of a shadow right about where it curves. On the opposite side, I'm going to do a shadow along where it curves as well. It's going to follow kind of the edge line and then curve towards the bottom and then back towards the knot. So it's kind of like a backwards J shape. And then on the top one, I'm going to come in where this kind of teardrop shadow is. And right along the edge, I'm going to pull the shadow in along the outer edge and then follow the teardrop shape towards the knot and then have it kind of come at a triangle, make a triangle from that to the bottom of that ribbon, if that makes sense. Sometimes it can be hard to give directions on these like organic shapes because how do you explain what this blob is? Then I'm going to make it look like there's a little bit of an indent on this ribbon. So I'm going to just do kind of a U shape to start with and then pull it down towards the knot. So we've blocked in a little bit with some of our shadowed color. Now I'm going to take our purple and I'm going to start blocking in some more of these like creases and folds. So I'm starting with doing kind of an arrow that folds in and goes towards the knot and follows the base of that ribbon. We're going to have a shadow section within the knot, right at the base, where it kind of folds up. Coming around. Let's see. Kind of doing another triangular shape coming out from the knot. I'm going to add a shadow on the side of the knot that's opposite of the light coming in. And then doing a bit of a shadow on this bottom ribbon. Okay. Then we're going to start fine-tuning some of these lines with our reds. I'm going to take our bright red and start reinforcing kind of where some of these shadows meet. And kind of have the red go around and follow the folds of the ribbon. I'm going to switch to a cooler tone red to blend some of this out. I'm going to do a side swipe to blend it a bit. And now I'm going to dust off the rest of this bow. Okay. Then I'm going to come in with a little bit of our dark blue. I'm going to use the royal blue. And I'm just going to do a few impressionistic lines coming out from the knot. Because we're not trying to make this look photorealistic or anything like that. We're just trying to give the impression that there's dimension. So I have this dark blue and I'm just going to do a few line details for our bow. Do a few towards the base of it and where it meets the other ribbons. Then I'm going to do some in the darker shadows. Just like that. So we're starting to get some more dimension within our bow. Okay. So we're going to just start refining the last few details on this picture. Again, we're going for painterly. We're not trying to go for realism. So I'm going to take our bright red and I'm going to refine a little bit more of the shape of our red ornaments. And just clean up some of these lines. It's okay to leave some of them showing through since we want this to look reflective. We can make it look like it's reflecting some of the objects around it. I'm just cleaning up some of the lines and edges, so maybe it's not quite so sketchy. Taking a dark red, coming in and doing that as well. Okay, I'm going to use a little bit of our violet to put in some of those shadowed sections on our ornaments. It's funny seeing how much different this looks color-wise than on the screen versus in real life. Because it's just so much brighter on the screen. I'll have to see if I can tweak some of that over bright look so that you on future live streams you guys get a little bit more of an accurate representation of what the color looks like. So I'm going to do a little bit more of the shadow, a side swipe with the purple on the base of some of these ribbons. This stage in a painting, I kind of just bounce around and see what needs to be tweaked or adjusted. Okay, we're going to take our kind of mid-tone yellow or ochre color and start refining some more of those details on those little gold ornaments or lights that we put on. And then use it a little bit to help create some of that glow effect on our red ones. And again, if your pastel isn't depositing color and it looks more like it's just smudging it, then you might need to clean off your pastel. Then I'm going to get kind of this like tan, kind of camel caramel color. And I'm going to use that for some more of those shadows on that gold. And I'm not making them like a perfectly smooth shadow shape. I'm just kind of doing squiggly lines. Just to help them start looking a little more dimensional. I'm going to take a little bit of green and throw it in there so it looks like it's reflecting a little bit of the colors around it. Then I'm going to take our dark green and add just a little bit of a cast shadow and maybe some like branches coming off and around some of these ornaments. Like that. So we are on the home stretch of this picture. I'm going to take some of our light green. I'm going to use this pale light green color, and I'm just going to do some like squiggly lines to bring out some like individual highlights on some of these branches over some of these darker sections. And just refine. I'm just, again, holding my pastel on its kind of narrow flat edge and just kind of doing little tiny squiggles. I'm going to add just a tiny bit of this blue into our wreath because it's in the background and I want it to kind of show up in a few areas so that it doesn't just sit in one spot. I want to bounce it around. So I'm going to just do a little bit of blue within it. And this is going to help create a little bit more color harmony within our picture. Okay. Especially kind of on this more highlighted section, we can use it to kind of tone it down. You can even use some of it to tone some of the shadows on this ribbon. So we've pulled in some of the background color into the wreath so that it's looks like it belongs. I'm going to also kind of focus it. I'm going to grab the lighter one and kind of focus it along the edges of the wreath so that it looks like there's little gaps within the branches coming off of it, so it doesn't look too perfectly round. It's similar to what you will do with trees, where you'll want some of the background to shine through where the gaps in the branches are, so that it looks like there's not just like a solid mass of leaves, and that there's some light showing through. So I want some of that background color to show up. Okay. Let's see. We're going to do, we've got our dark blue color, and we're going to just drag a little bit of this very lightly on the background section where we're going to want a little bit more shadow, okay? So we've got some of our shadow colors. Right along there, we're going to do a little bit towards the top, not as much, but just a little bit. Then I'm going to take our dark teal color and just kind of blend that in. And the direction that you start and end your pastels makes a difference. So if I start in this darker section and pull down, it's going to pull that darker dust all the way down. And then I'm going to pull it from the shadow down to help pull the shadow down further and blend it in. And just do a little bit of this color around even the highlighted section, just so that this highlight stands out a little bit more. But we're keeping it very painterly, not too fussy at all. And let's see, I'm gonna look at it from a distance. One thing I suggest when you are working on a picture is when you're getting close to the end, take a break or look at it from a distance so you can see what needs to be kind of tweaked and adjusted. So what I'm kind of seeing is all of our ornaments are kind of getting the same highlight and amount of shadow. So I'm going to vary some of that up. I'm going to use this kind of pink magenta color and just kind of on a few of the ornaments, just kind of change it up just a little bit so they all don't look like copy and paste of each other. Okay. Now I'm going to take some of our warm gold color and I'm going to just start blocking in some of our highlights on our ribbon. And it's going to mix with the red, and that is all right. I'm just kind of bringing in some of these highlights to really help it start to pop. So on this top one where it's closer to the highlight, I'm going to go along the outer edge and along the rim of the fold. I'm going to do it right at the top of the knot. There we go. If your pastel isn't depositing color, you can try cleaning off your pastel. And I'm going to try blending that in with a little bit of our, whoops, that isn't red. That was orange. There we go. I'm going to take that color and do it right along just a few more little sections that I want to highlight. So on the other upper bow, on the opposite side. Let's see. Just getting these last few details in. I'm going to just grab my black pastel, and I'm going to be very, very cautious with this one because I don't want it to be too strong or powerful. So I'm going to be very cautious with how I put in the dark black pastels, and then I'll do other colors over the top. But this is just going to help push some of those values to be a little bit darker, and then we'll do some of the brighter white highlights. So I'm going to just do a little bit of it right in our bow where it comes close to the knot in that teardrop section. I'm going to do a little bit of it on these lower ribbons right along the base. And I'm going to do like, instead of doing like a harsh line, I'm going to just do a few squiggly lines in other areas to start pushing just a few of these shadows just to be a little bit stronger. You really want the full spectrum of value within your picture to really help it get dimension. If everything is too mid-tone and you don't have bright highlights or dark shadows, it will read flat. If your highlights, if you're using pure white and they don't feel to be standing out, or you can't get your whites white enough, that usually means the colors around it need to be a little bit darker. Okay, so we're getting some of these values in, and we will soften these up with a little bit of our green pastels. This is a good technique if you have like a beginner set of pastels like this and you don't have like a full spectrum of value within each color. You can layer up your darks like this on the paper. So you can do some black pastel, and then you can take your colored pastel, so in this case a dark green, and you can just layer it up over the top. Okay, this will keep it from reading too much black, but it will start to get that value in. And let's see, get a little bit more of that shadow in. I'm going to reinforce a few of these golden ornaments. They kind of got a little too small as we worked along. And then for kind of our finishing touches, I'm going to just do some brown, and I'm going to use that to help kind of give the feel that there's some branches kind of hidden in our wreath. I was about to call it an ornament. There's ornaments on it, but this is a wreath. So any recommendations on using pastels with watercolor? It's something I use a lot. I use watercolor in my underpaintings. The type of paper you use is going to be one of the biggest factors. So you can use a watercolor paper and paint on that, which is a great option. I would recommend using a cold press watercolor paper or even a rough press paper, depending on how rough it actually is. I'm going to take a darker brown and start creating a little bit of shadow on some of these twigs I drew. So you can do that and stretch your paper out, do your underpainting with watercolor, and then let that dry completely before you start with your pastels. And then you would just treat it like a normal pastel piece. Another option is to use pastel paper. And that's typically how I use watercolors as an underpainting, because I like to lean more on the watercolor side or the pastel side of this mixed medium piece instead of the watercolor side of it. So I will use sanded paper. Typically I'll use UArt sanded paper. That's my favorite. And it's kind of a beige color. And it can take water, mediums, and rubbing alcohols and things like that really, really well. And I will do my underpainting with the watercolor. I'll use old brushes for it because the sandpaper is hard on your brushes. Do the underpainting, and then I'll go in and start doing a lot more detail with pastels. And this is really nice for if you're going for a lot more of a realistic picture. It can make it so you can tone and do an underpainting to fit each individual area of your picture, and then you can build up those layers. So it allows you to really push realism to the next level. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Hopefully that helps you. Okay, so we have some twigs, we've got some ornaments, we've got our greenery. Some of my branches, my brown branches are going too much in the same direction. Whoops, grabbed the wrong color. So I'm going to just twist my board around and use that to kind of switch up the way it was going. And then I'm going to do a few layers of green, these last few details of green over the top of it, so it doesn't look too perfect. I'm going to take this dark royal blue and pull it right down to help create a bigger cast shadow. And just do the final details with that. I'm going to take our light green and put in a few highlights within the wreath. I'm going to blend this section out just a little bit. Okay. Let's see. This one's soft enough. Yeah, that one's a little bit softer. Sometimes your pastels will vary in hardness and softness even within a same brand. So just adding a few last highlights. And then I'm going to grab a white pastel and we'll do a few little tweaks and adjustments. I'm going to be using this Jack Richenson white pastel. With pastels, you tend to work hardest pastels to softest pastels, because if you have a thick layer of pastel and then you take a really hard or firm pastel over the top, it will scrape off that layer of pastel you added. But if you do a softer pastel over the top of it, it will just kind of press it in. So I like to do my finishing details with a softer brand of pastels, like this Jack Richenson one. And then it allows me to get those last few highlights. So I'm going to just do the last few highlights with this to really help it pop, because we have our midtones and our darks, but now we want a little bit of white on here to really look like these ornaments are reflective and that there's maybe Christmas lights around it. So we've got some of that. I'm just doing little kind of dabbing motions with it, so each one isn't like a perfectly shaped reflection. And then I'm going to do just a few little highlights on our bow. Just to really play in some of that dimension. And to give it a really painterly feel. I'm going to do a few kind of white polka dots. So it looks like there's maybe some little white berries attached to some of these branches. Just to really fill it in and give a little bit more texture and dynamic to this piece. Let's see. There we go. The last thing I'm going to do is, well, one, I'm going to shake off the dust. Okay, let's get that to focus. And then I'm going to just peel up my paper. Because the problem with taping your pastel down is that you can get a little bit of a highlight, like halo effect. So I'm just going to get rid of some of that by pulling some of our pastel colors around that area. So now we have a much smoother effect and everything is uniform. So if I wanted to frame this, I wouldn't have to worry about a weird little highlight. Okay, so I'm going to call that good. So this is our beginner wreath. And if you guys have any more questions you would like me to answer them, feel free to ask them. The nice thing about doing live streams is you get to see me work through it, and you guys can come back and rewatch this anytime you want. So I hopefully that you found this helpful. If there are any better times that might work for you for a live stream, let me know. Right now, I'm kind of stuck doing them while my kids are at school. Just because my studio is in an open loft in the middle of the house, so you can't hide from the sound. But hopefully we will be moving soon, and I'll have a whole room that I can close this off, and I can do more evening classes if you guys would like evening live streams or ones during the day like this. So let me know. I should probably sign this, huh? I am not one to have my signature like stand out a ton. I kind of like it to be hidden. So I'm going to take, let's see, I don't want to do pure black. I'm going to take kind of this dark color. Let's do blue. And I'll just do my initials right at the base of the wreath. And I'll go over it with a highlight. So that's a little bit of a shadow. Okay. I'll give you guys another minute or two if you have questions. And then I'll call it a day, and I will post the after photo in better lighting on my Instagram account. It's just lauren.watkins.art on Instagram. The link is in the bio so that you guys can see it. I'll also be announcing on there whenever I'm doing a live stream. And if I'm doing a really complicated piece, I will be posting the reference photo and even a drawing guide so that a couple days before. So if you guys want to draw it out or even trace it, I think tracing is a great tool when you're starting in art. If you want to like kind of blow it up and trace it onto your picture so that you can follow along easier, I can do that. But I hope you guys have a great day. Let's see. Daytime's working for some. Awesome. I'm hoping to do a lot more live streams, maybe like one or two or more than one a week, maybe 2 a week. So I can do one during the day and one in the evening and kind of switch it up. I do like teaching live. it's so much easier to explain it and kind of my thought process, because when I record it and speed it up, I can't remember what I did, exactly why I chose to do things the way that I was going to do them when I'm like editing later on. And I have to go so fast on it because the YouTube algorithm does not like pushing really, really long videos. It likes the like 20 to or 10 to 20 to 30-minute range. So it can be a little trickier. So, anyways, I've got to go pick up my kids from school, and I will see you guys next week. I'm hoping to do another live stream next Wednesday starting at 12:30. If you guys want to follow along, have a great day. Bye.